Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Prest. I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to LibertyRadioLive.com. Thanks for tuning in this morning. I wish to continue our reading and discussion of the book, The Vatican Billions by Avro Manhattan. I hope the complexity of the Vatican scandals haven't bewildered you, but it's information that we should be aware of to assess what the Catholic Church truly is in the world, and what association, if any, a Christian should have to do with it. Now, the Vatican's involvement, particularly the Vatican Bank's involvement in this massive, complicated, convoluted bank scandal is being uncovered slowly but surely. And the Vatican is having to answer some very, very pointed questions. The Vatican's response initially was that Archbishop Marcinkus, the head of the Vatican Bank, was the victim of sophisticated cosmopolitan swindlers who had gotten him into situations that he was innocent of, ignorant of. Let's put it that way. But we continue now in the last paragraph on page 251 of the book. It says, Pope Wojtyła, that's John Paul II, who knew the true facts, quietly set up a committee composed of 3 members of each disputant. Now, why did John Paul II know the true facts? Well, he was Pope, and he knew what that $1.4 billion was doing, what purpose it was serving for the church. And I maintain that much of the reason why Pope Wojtyła, John Paul II, was elected was to carry on with the operations, the secret clandestine operations of the Vatican Bank, to carry those on and to help cover up what was really behind all this money scandal through the Vatican Bank. But the heat is rising, and Pope John Paul II sets up a committee of 3 to help answer some of these questions. This committee, it says, its task was to reach a compromise acceptable to both Italy and the Vatican. Thereupon, he made it known that he was willing to reach a settlement with Italy's claims about the debts incurred by the Vatican Bank. Here's a quote. It says, "The Holy See is disposed to take all the steps that may be required for an understanding on both sides," he said, "provided the entire truth is brought to light." And let me tell you, no one was more involved in covering up the true nature of these scandals than Pope John Paul II. Anyway, continuing, says the announcement had come after the 4-day meeting of over 100 cardinals held in Rome in November of 1982, already mentioned, during which he pledged his readiness to come to an understanding with Italy over the disputed $1,287,000,000 claim, which was reduced from the original $1.4 billion bill against the IOR. It says the papal admission to settle with a compromise raised more questions than it had answered, or appeared to have solved. Since the panel had discovered, among other things, not only that the Vatican Bank, the IOR, had been heavily involved in the borrowing of the missing millions via the mysterious shell corporations, and equally that it had been their legal owner, but also that the several letters of comfort, as much as making the Vatican Bank the guarantor of these loans, had been issued as early as September of the previous year. And perhaps even more interesting, that Roberto Calvi had responded to them with letters of discharge of his own. In other words, alleviating the Vatican Bank of any responsibility, which he absolved the IOR of any responsibility for the borrowing. So here we have some complicated issues coming to rise here. And it says the close ties between Calvi and the director of the Vatican Bank, it was further discovered, had gone back years when the two had been involved in controversial activities via another Vatican top financier, whom we've already met, Michele Sindona. The trio, the Vatican's mafiosi, Sindona, Marcinkus, and Calvi, later nicknamed the Vatican Mafia, had operated together as early as 1972 at a time when they had acquired the Banca Cattolica del Veneto, owned by the Vatican itself. The Sindona-Marcinkus-Calvi transactions had manipulated, so it was said, about $100 million. When, following the Sindona crash, the official liquidator of the Banca Privata Italiana, one Giorgio Ambrosoli, presented his report to the American judiciary, Ambrosoli testified that, quote, at least $6.5 million had been paid, probably as a commission to an American bishop. That's a direct reference to Marcinkus, the head of the Vatican Bank. At that time, he was a bishop. And to a Milanese banker, that's a reference to Calvi at this period, who was at the Ambrosiano as a Sindona ex-protege. In his will, written days prior to his report and published in 1981, Ambrosoli, aware of the risk he was courting, wrote prophetically, quote, I might have to pay a very high price for what I've undertaken to do, unquote. And as we're going to see, he did certainly pay a high price. It says, interested parties, disconcerted at his findings, agreed with him. They decided to prevent the document from reaching the authorities. The day before he was to present his papers, they simply killed him. The true perpetrators of the murder were never discovered. Okay, more lives have been lost over this Vatican Bank scandal. And it says the close cooperation between Calvi and the IOR continued in later years. This was proved by the fact that in 1975, the IOR wrote an official letter trying to cover Calvi's operations dealing with the financial transference to the Banco Ambrosiano's overseas, the Banco Ambrosiano's overseas of Nassau. Calvi and Archbishop Marcinkus at that time were president and advisor, respectively. In June of 1982, however, Marcinkus denied having anything to do with it, although the letter of patronage written by the IOR, of which Marcinkus was then president, was dated 1975, as seen by the facsimile of the same letter on the pages previously in this work. Even more curious, however, was the fact that both Sindona and Calvi had therefore, by association with Archbishop Marcinkus, been closely connected also with the notorious P2 Masonic Lodge. One of their friends was not only Licio Gelli, the Grand Master of the Lodge, who we've already met, but also another influential Freemason, one Umberto Ortolani. The latter had always been so close to the Vatican inner circles that he had been made a, quote, gentleman of His Holiness the Pope, unquote, also a knight of the Holy Sepulchre. So now you know what you have to do to become a knight in the Roman Catholic Church. Now, the three Catholic financiers, in short, had dug up a past full of intrigues, many of which were still being spun by the same individuals still heavily involved with financial, Masonic, political activities and long-range equivocal operations in which international banking, the Vatican, the United States, and Soviet Russia had participated, even if by remote control. The most striking confirmation of the latter was that the missing millions began to vanish into a seemingly bottomless pit, mostly since 1979. That was the year when Karol Wojtyła, the newly elected Polish Pope, had forced himself into Poland under the guise of a pastoral visit as Pope John Paul II. The result of his 8-day trip was the launching of a fiercely political revolutionary syndicalism known as Solidarity. The movement, achieved by Pope Wojtyła and patronized by the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States government. I call it Catholics in Action. Here you see Pope Wojtyła and the CIA working together, as we've seen in previous works. It says the movement conceived by Pope Wojtyła and patronized by the CIA needed and received large sums of money. Now you know what the black budgets of the CIA do. It's all about religion, folks. The CIA is rightly called Catholics in Action, and you have to remember this. This is a good portion of it, that is the money, came from the special sections of the CIA. The rest, it was asserted, from the unlimited generosity of the Vatican Bank. So we have a connection between the CIA and common efforts with the Vatican Bank's objectives in Poland and elsewhere in Central America. We're going to see more about this. It says many of the missing millions, it was suggested, were funneled directly into Poland by the IOR itself and its lay and ecclesiastical agents. The even wider financial hole in the Ambrosiano-IOR partnership had been caused not only by the personal misappropriations of professional mafiosi, but mostly by the large secret subventions of the IOR. In as late as June 30th, 1982, more than 10 days after Calvi was found dead in London, the loaned capital and interest due by the companies in Luxembourg under the code name of the IOR, that is, the Vatican Bank, was exactly $1,275 million, of which the first payment of $50 million had been due since the same June 30th, 1982. The equivocal operations of the IOR, and thus of the Ambrosiano Bank, directed at the furtherance of ideological objectives of a religious political character in which the Vatican, Freemasonry, and tangentially the United States had all been involved, had been under suspicion long before the crash came. Okay, so people were catching on to this unholy alliance between the CIA, the government of the United States of America, and Freemasonry, and the Vatican, and the Vatican Bank. The suspicions had been fostered by a number of Catholic bankers who had been monitoring the unorthodox activities of both. Their criticism and fears produced a determined group from Lombardy, northern Italy, the very region in which the Ambrosiano was operating, whose specific purpose was to prevent the inevitable forthcoming Ambrosiano IOR disaster. To that effect, they prepared a written document meant for Pope Wojtyła. They had prepared it, they said, to save the Ambrosiano, not so much because it was the most prominent Catholic bank, but equally because of its close association with the IOR. They regretted, they added, that the two were co-responsible for Calvi's operations and dealt with a degenerate Freemasonry in contact with the Vatican itself. The close association of the Vatican with Sindona, Calvi, Licio Gelli, and other Masons during the 10 previous years, plus their dealings with the IOR, they told the Pope, had involved the Vatican to such imbroglio that the like of which had never been seen before. In view of that, they asked him to dissolve the IOR, the Vatican Bank, to dissolve the IOR link with its current associates. In other words, they were pleading with Pope Wojtyła to get the Vatican Bank out of this scandal. And it says the dissolution was the more urgent since the Vatican Bank had become not only a partner of the Ambrosiano, but also because the IOR was a very active associate, adding by way of an extra warning that the IOR director, Archbishop Marcinkus, was as active. Indeed, that the Archbishop had been considered by none other than the Bank of Italy to be, quote, in the top management, unquote, of the whole dangerous Ambrosiano IOR affair with their sundry phantom corporations. Okay, the accusation is clearly being made now by the Italian government, and it's all focusing on Archbishop Marcinkus. Now, Pope Wojtyła did nothing. The involvement of the Vatican Bank had already gone too far. The papal machinations, supported by their financial subventions to the counter-revolutionary worker movement in Poland, by now had become unstoppable. So this is what they were doing with the money. They were subverting the government of Poland. And it says, as the crisis of the Ambrosiano was reaching a climax, however, the Vatican began to consider various steps by which to prevent it from turning into a total disaster. The first of such steps was to prevent the Ambrosiano crash. Its postponement would have saved the IOR. The key to the move was Calvi. Calvi was asked to have a secret encounter with Pope Wojtyła, something which was hotly denied by the Vatican after Calvi's quote-unquote suicide. The move was aborted because events, meanwhile, had forced Calvi to flee from Rome. Prior to that, Calvi had arranged also a secret meeting with the IOR top administrator, subsequently indicted by Italy. The meeting had been arranged for the 17th of June, the day before Calvi fled to London to meet his Freemason quote-unquote brother, Carboni. That there had been serious moves to save the Ambrosiano and therefore the Vatican Bank was proved also by another top disclosure. 24 hours before Calvi's quote-unquote suicide, a consortium of bankers from the United States had made a definite offer to save the Ambrosiano IOR with a prompt $1.25 billion. The financial problem, therefore, although of the utmost seriousness, basically was quote-unquote solvable. The more so, since addition to the providential offer from the United States consortium, there had been another monetary rescue move. Calvi, it was disclosed, had flown to London also to strike a deal with a super Catholic organization, the Opus Dei. Now listen carefully to what Avro Manhattan says about Opus Dei. The Opus Dei is a semi-secret religious lay order whose paramount objective is total support for the papacy and of the most conservative principles of the Catholic doctrines. Now, this is similar to the purpose of the Jesuits and so many other of the ecclesiastical lay organizations of the Roman Catholic Church, like the Knights of Malta and the Knights of Columbus. They're there to protect the papacy. But this group, the Opus Dei, some people pronounce it, is an ultra-conservative Roman Catholic organization. Now, what does that mean? That means they hold to the traditional conservative, I call Tridentine Roman Catholic doctrines, in that they hold fast to the doctrines of the Council of Trent. Okay, the doctrines of the Council of Trent was to label Protestants heretics, to be extirpated by Inquisition and torture and murder and slaughter and genocide and religicide and every other side. Okay, Opus Dei is determined to destroy Protestantism and to raise the papacy to world supremacy. All right, now continuing with the text, it says, its devotion to both is unequaled. That is, its devotion to the papacy and its devotion to the bloody Counter-Reformation is unequaled in the Catholic world, this author says. Its members have dedicated themselves with their personal and corporate wealth to be the blind instruments of the Roman Catholic Church. All right, their entire lives, their personal lives, and also their corporate wealth is dedicated to the service of the papacy. And you'll find this consistent in just about every ecclesiastical order of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, owing to such religious totality, Opus Dei considered its duty to help the Vatican, and thus the Pope, to extricate themselves from the Ambrosiano IOR impasse. This could be done by filling in the quote-unquote hole created by the missing millions with millions of their own dollars. So Opus Dei wants to bail out the Vatican Bank to save the papacy and to continue with this Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order. You know, this Vatican Bank scandal has had the potential to topple the papacy, as we're going to find out later. Now, to the Opus Dei, P2 Lodge was not only a simple Masonic lodge. It was an evil body with powerful political interests, reaching the most recondite nooks of national and international illegality. An entity which had specialized in labyrinthine conspiratorial operations into which it had drawn the Church, the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, and the Pope himself. So from Opus Dei's point of view, the P2 Lodge is responsible for getting the Vatican and the Vatican Bank in this position. Little do they know that the Jesuits run P2 Lodge. Now, in their view, in the view of Opus Dei, members of the Masonic Lodge, P2, were the instruments of the IOR's involvement in the disaster. Calvi had been one of them. As a director of the Ambrosiano, he had accelerated the tragedy by pressing the IOR to pay back to his bank what, according to him, the IOR owed the Ambrosiano. Calvi, according to such interpretation, had asked the IOR to retrieve the millions of dollars which, according to him, the IOR had deposited in certain numbered Swiss accounts. This he did to save the Ambrosiano from the impending crash prior to his flight to London. Now, continuing, it says, the disaster occurred when the IOR refused to do so, because either it could not or was ordered not to, or because the money had been locked into numbered accounts to which others had the key. The Grand Master of P2 Lodge, Licio Gelli, knew the secret number of the accounts of the Union Bank of Switzerland, as later, in September of '82, Attorney General of the Swiss Canton Ticino Bernasconi revealed when stating, quote, stating that, quote, large sums of the Ambrosiano had been secreted into several numbered accounts, unquote. So, they know where the money's hid, they're in trouble, and they're going to try to retrieve that money. And it's going to lead to trouble, and we'll be right back after these messages. It says the Grand Master of the P2 Lodge, Licio Gelli, knew the secret number of the accounts of the Union Bank of Switzerland, as later on, Attorney General of the Swiss Canton Ticino, it's hard for me to say, Canton Ticino, Bernasconi, revealed when stating that large sums of the Ambrosiano had been secreted into several unnumbered Swiss accounts. Several numbered Swiss accounts. They're anonymous accounts. This is where the Vatican and criminal elements throughout the world secret their money in Switzerland, in numbered bank accounts. Okay, Licio Gelli knows the number of one of these numbered accounts in Switzerland, And he's going to try to retrieve this money, as we're soon going to see. It says the speculations seem to have been substantiated, although not the identity of the depositors, when top members of the P2 Lodge tried to withdraw one $60 million and the other an undisclosed large sum from Swiss banks, as we've already seen, and were arrested as a result. Calvi's flight to London and his aborted attempt to negotiate a deal with the Opus Dei to prevent the impending Ambrosiano IOR disaster, therefore, seemed to have been an attempt on the part of the Opus Dei to provide the money in order to save the Vatican from the inevitability of a major financial scandal. Also, to prevent the disclosure of the Church's involvement with sundry operational partners like a notorious Masonic lodge, and equivocal associations suspected of dealing with political and social subversion, not to mention with arms trafficking and even drug smuggling. That such speculations were not mere idle suppositions seem to have been supported by Calvi himself. A few weeks before, Calvi, referring to the impending Ambrosiano crash, in fact gave a telling warning. Quote, "Should anything happen to me," Calvi had stated, "the Vatican would find itself in such a scandal that it would have to leave St. Peter's Square." Now, let me read that again now so you comprehend. This is Roberto Calvi, God's banker, they say. And it says, if anything should happen to me, Calvi stated, if anything should happen to me, the Vatican would find itself in such a scandal that it would have to leave St. Peter's Square. Unquote. So Calvi's got the goods, and he's just simply warning he's willing to spill the beans. And it says, thereupon, acknowledging his fear that he might even be killed, he went so far as to imply that the disclosures which might follow, had not a solution been found in the meanwhile, could be of such perilous nature that, quote, the Pope himself would have to resign, unquote. It was obvious that a man who could make such ominous allusions must have had factual evidence of a most alarming nature at his disposal, since it was clear that he was referring to operations that bypassed mere financial transactions, such as the fermenting of political unrest, the sale of arms, and the promotion of ideological subversion. The sum of such activities, promoted simultaneously by the Mafia, Freemasonry, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Vatican Bank, would have amalgamated their forces into a monstrous consortium of secretive, if not illegal, activities. Calvi, who it seemed was ready to accept the Opus Dei's offer, was warned, quote, not to accept their financial assistance, unquote. This warning, given at the last moment, had come, it was said, from certain prominent individuals of the P2 Lodge. Now, it shows a copy in the book of an article in an Italian newspaper. It says the above article from Il Giornale of August 22nd, 1982, presents a document drafted by Catholic shareholders and meant for Pope John Paul II. It condemns the close partnership of the Ambrosiano and the IOR. It accuses the Ambrosiano and the IOR of dealing with Freemasonry and with the international mafia. The most striking part of this accusation is that such activities are conducted via a secret society called Suprafin. The society, Suprafin, the writer says, belongs to the IOR. The IOR and the Suprafin, plus the Ambrosiano, are all operating closely with the P2 Lodge and with Sindona, also with Freemasons, all of whom are protected by the Vatican itself. The Bank of Italy, therefore, has ascertained that Archbishop Marcinkus is operating at, quote, the top management, unquote, of the Banco Ambrosiano itself. The writers asked the Pope to detach the activities of the Ambrosiano from those of the IOR, the Vatican Bank, and of the Vatican before it's too late. During the crisis of midsummer of 1982, after Calvi's so-called suicide, the Vatican denied any involvement with the Ambrosiano. Yet the above letter was sent to the Pope and read by Marcinkus himself in January of 1982. The document was dated the 12th of January, 1982. Since 1987, that is, since the election of the Polish Pope, Pope John Paul II, the Vatican had been openly motivated by a strong social interpretation of the Gospels. A social interpretation of the Gospels. It's going to have some significance. They call it the social interpretation of the Gospels. During his sundry peregrinations, Pope Wojtyła had invariably created unrest by encouraging subversive Catholic movements who had accepted his socialist ideas. So now you know what they're talking about, a social interpretation of the Gospels, talking about socialism. Their acceptance, however, was not a mere verbal one. It trespassed into insurrectional fields. These necessitated monetary help, given via local secretive church channels, and more often than not, directly via the secular associates of the IOR, the Vatican Bank. Financial grants, often through religious organizations, sympathetic with left-wing insurrections, meant the involvement, even if tangentially, of the Vatican Bank, whose financial bulk derives from deposits of religious organizations. Hence, Catholic priests being involved in actual armed insurrections in Latin America, the Philippines, and Poland would automatically have spelled the potential traffic of clandestine sales of arms, and therefore the involvement of shady banking concerns such as the mysterious shell companies of the IOR, and as a result, directly of the Vatican itself. So the Vatican's waging a clandestine war, and the bank and the Vatican Bank is financing it through all these machinations. And it says Calvi's Masonic associates, and later many of his Masonic accusers after his death, fled to South America, where they had monetary funds they called friends, and made use, it was alleged, of the Ambrosiano's branches in Peru and the Bahamas. The background to Calvi operations prior to his flight from Italy assumes an additional significance if we were to add yet another facet of what had been going on prior to the final collapse. The head of the anti-terrorist police, General Roberto Dalla Chiesa, had repeatedly warned Calvi of impending danger to his life. The general had hinted, however, that the peril was of a more intangible nature than he suspected. Quote, "Look behind your back," he used to tell him. Calvi's wife, who at this time had to be guarded by the police, later insisted that her husband's life had been endangered by the quote-unquote priests. Calvi, it appears, had also become convinced that those who wanted him out of the way were in the Vatican, a suspicion which was never proved. Prior to leaving for London, he warned his wife that, yes, the danger came from the priests. Whatever he might have meant by such an emotive accusation, the fact remained that General Dalla Chiesa, the head of the anti-terrorist police, must have known of some definite plot directed at getting rid of Calvi, or at least he suspected that some elements were determined to silence him for good, lest he should name names. since many of such names could have been found in the highest pinnacles of the political, Masonic, and even ecclesiastical life in Italy, and even the Vatican itself. After Calvi's so-called suicide, his briefcase, which he always carried with him, disappeared mysteriously, the only item which was missing. It contained secret documents connected with P2 Lodge and the Vatican Bank. The general's hint to Calvi must have provoked grave apprehension amidst those who were planning his demise, since the general knew about the whole affair, more than it was safe for him to know. The ring, operating the invisible web around the Ambrosiano IOR P2 Lodge, decided to act. General Della Chiesa was sent to Sicily. While there, he and his wife were riddled by 100 bullets in plain daylight in the center of a Sicilian town on September 22, 1982, ostensibly by the Mafia. In reality, however, it was by the same forces which had already liquidated several other individuals connected with the Ambrosiano IOR P2 Lodge. Calvi's death under Blackfriars Bridge, marked by its macabre ritual, was the climax of something which had been brewing behind a colossal conspiratorial wall of equivocal operations and plots, many of which had perpetrated very deeply within the Vatican citadel. Many of which had penetrated very deeply within the Vatican citadel. Subsequent events proved this to be so. The secretary of the IOR itself, Monsignor Donato de Bonis, directly under Archbishop Marcinkus, had his passport withdrawn February 10, 1983, when he was accused of tax evasion in petroleum products. The incriminating operation dated back to the years of the Sindona Calvi Marcinkus financial junta. Also involved was a general, the former head of the Ministry of Finance's own police. He was sentenced to several years in jail for tax evasion involving fraudulent handling of some $300 million. Other prelates were arrested February 7th, 1983, including Monsignor Simone Duca of Rome and Dom F. Quaglia, and others had their passports withdrawn, including Monsignor Mario Pimpo, director of the department known as Confidential Affair. A department known as Confidential Affair, the office of Cardinal Poletti, the Pope's own vicar of Rome. The financial activities of the Vatican Bank, or of its lay partner, the Ambrosiano, while the primary promoters of the great monetary scandal, had uncovered the tip of a submerged iceberg whose magnitudinous proportions had reached the darkest recesses of a twilight world of global intrigues, religious corruption, and financial banditry seldom equaled even in our present century." Unquote. Is this the Church of Jesus Christ, I ask my listeners? Could this be the Church of Jesus Christ, that mustard seed? Or is it, as I've been corrected, not a chimera, but a chimera? A huge tree, uncharacteristic of a natural mustard seed. It's a huge tree, so large that its branches cover the whole world, and within it, birds roost. Birds of prey roost. This is not the Church of Jesus Christ. She calls herself the Church of Jesus Christ, but it's a chimera, a genetic mutation, an unnatural counterfeit of the true Church of Jesus Christ. And if you're Roman Catholic, you have to admit, while we're reading this book, that this is not the behavior of the Church of Jesus Christ. And you might legitimately question whether this is the Church of Jesus Christ. And I would tell my Protestant listeners, my evangelical listeners, if you're involved in the ecumenical movement, you're headed back for Rome, and you've repudiated the Christ of the Bible. Now, chapter 33 of the book is entitled Riddle of an Enigma, the Vatican Bank. The Institute for Religious Works, the IOR for short, we call it the Vatican Bank, gives the impression of a corporate body wholly dedicated to pious operations and charitable activities. It's nothing of the kind. It is or was one of the richest banks in the world. As a semi-autonomous entity, it was officially charged with the handling of deposits and investments of hundreds, indeed of thousands of millions of dollars, most of them the legal property of Roman Catholic lay and religious orders, trusts, legacies, and the like. It acted and still acts also for many of the Church's own holdings, monetary funds, and multi-million-dollar securities portfolios, many of which are or were secreted in sundry vaults in the United States or in numbered accounts in Swiss banks. As a financial powerhouse, it was and still is an ecclesiastical subterfuge created to bypass national barriers, international regulations, and to carry out monetary evasions via subterranean semi-diplomatic channels. Because of this, it operates within and outside the boundaries of ultranational legality. Its wealth has always been reputed to be immense. That this was no mere speculation was substantiated by the prosaic assessments of level-headed international financiers. One of these, none other than the annual report of the Bank for International Settlement of Basel, Switzerland, listed the foreign currency position of the banks in the 10 largest industrial countries of the world. According to it, in 1977, the IOR had foreign deposits of $100 million and no debts. That was only one of its current sundry diversified accounts. By 1983, it had about $2 billion in net assets, $6 billion in deposits, and an active relationship with over 200 banks all over the globe. Its operations had been so secretive and labyrinthine that it is almost impossible to know where and how or by whom the money is used or is employed, as the Ambrosiano case has so amply demonstrated. Because of its ramifications and mystery of its many activities, or rather of its true objectives, the IOR, the Vatican Bank, became the major financial powerhouse of the Vatican. From the very beginning, as such, it acted on its behalf during official and semi-official operations, many of which trespassed, even very often, from the mere financial into religious, diplomatic, and ideological fields. It's an axiom that financial considerations will corrupt religion and religious institutions. But while it is true that religious considerations can corrupt finances, it is no less true that when religion is supported by finance, and finance is supported by religion, religion will be corrupt simultaneously on two fronts. The result is that it will be rendered the ancillary instrument to both. When religion happens to be the Catholic Church, by virtue of the fact that she has given herself a uniqueness which is peculiar only to herself, then the same church will use and abuse her financial might to maintain her own uniqueness, cost what it may. Money is power. Power is linked with politics. Hence, political problems are interlocked with the financial influence of the Vatican in monetary administration. The case of the Ambrosiano IOR scandal was typical of the double nature and of the double objectives of the IOR itself. It could not have been otherwise, since Vatican financial activities have seldom been confined to simply monetary operations. Whenever activated, they are activated because of some ulterior goal. Besides immediate targets, ecclesiastic or otherwise, their true motive is consistently the expansion of the influence of the Roman Catholic Church as well as an ideological crusader. Let me read this again. Whenever activated, they are activated because of some ulterior goal. What is the ulterior goal? The New World Order, a global religion and a global government. And it says, besides immediate targets, ecclesiastic or otherwise, their true motive is consistently the expansion of the influence of the Roman Catholic Church, as well, listen, as well as an ideological crusader. An ideological crusader. She's got an agenda, a global agenda. And she achieves that global agenda through war. And that's what happened to the $1.5 billion. It was used for war purposes, gun running, and political upheavals in Central America and in Poland and South America. And we completely ignored what happened in this country as a result of this. This author, without mentioning it, is talking about the New World Order and the Vatican's systematic operations to achieve that end through high finance, through intrigue, financial intrigue. You know, this whole book goes into the folder of Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order. This tells us what the Vatican's global agenda is. She's involved in ideological crusades. Ideological crusades. And what's the ideal for the papacy? That it rules the world. That it's the head of the world religion. And that it becomes the head of the world government. That's what this is all about. He says, under Pope Paul VI, for instance, large sums of money were siphoned via the IOR, the Vatican Bank, into feeding left-wing oriented movements in many parts of the world. These were also sponsored by another financially mighty power, that of the Jesuits, who shared Pope Paul VI's left-wing views. The Vatican-Moscow alliance, although never officially accepted as such, was a de facto reality. What made such a political reality active were the secret financial operations of the Vatican Bank and its subsidiaries. That speaks volumes.